All right, I got this turned on. Excellent. I do speak quickly, and I will try to slow down because there's a lot to go over tonight. And I will also try to go quickly because I know my bedtime is usually around 10 o'clock, so I am feeling it like all of you. And for extra bonuses, I have been stuck at home with a 11, 9, and 3-year-old since Monday. Okay, so we're all getting a little wired and antsy at this point. But if you could just, for a minute, I normally say close your eyes and imagine. Maybe we don't want to close our eyes tonight, but just use your imagination and go with me to a different world. Think about a world where you could control your digital device using just the thoughts in your mind with this like a brain-computer interface technology. Imagine a world where maybe the sizzling steak that you enjoy on Friday night is grown from a plant, not an animal. Okay? Imagine a world where Earth is not the only planet in our solar system with humans inhabiting it. Or imagine a world where ancient animals that have been extinct for thousands of years are resurrected and walking the Earth once again. Sounds crazy. In December of 2021, neuroscientist Tom Oxley gave his Twitter account over to a man named Phil O'Keefe. He was a gentleman with bodily paralysis, and he could not use his arms or his hands. And using a tiny brain implant, Phil tweeted out the following. "Hello, world. Short tweet, monumental progress." And the next one. "No need for keystrokes or voices. I created this tweet just by thinking it." There's a new science called cultivated meat, and it is genetically engineered and grown from plant proteins that perfectly mirrors the texture and taste of animal meat. Cultivated meat takes less energy to grow, it's more cost-effective, and it's a healthier alternative, and it is already approved in Asia. It is wildly popular in Singapore, and it is poised to hit the US for mass production in the next decade. Right? We'll see. They did just officially get their pork chop that passed muster for some people. We'll see how that goes, though. It's a thing. The manned mission to Mars is well underway, and the application deadline for the potential astronauts was this last June, so I'm sorry if we missed that deadline, but NASA is now under presidential orders to have a manned mission to Mars by the year 2033. And an organization called Colossal Laboratories is at this very moment cloning the DNA of the ancient woolly mammoth with the goal of bringing the animal back by 2027. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've seen this movie. It does not end well. But these are current realities. The world is changing, and the cultural issues of the day are more reminiscent for some of a science fiction movie plot than news headlines. So for this final leg of our conversation tonight, we're just going to talk about how do we navigate these uncharted waters? Where do we go from here? How do we even begin to plow ahead? So I kind of cover with 3 questions that we're going to use as our guideposts for this next kind of time together. Who are we? Where are we? And why are we here? In some ways, these are questions as old as humanity itself, but simultaneously, the questions, as they never change, the answers are rapidly evolving as societies rise and fall through time. And the answers to these questions highlight a whole host of cultural issues, but as a church, we have to be mindful of them today as we prepare to engage with the issues for tomorrow. The answers with these questions also bring up a whole litany of follow-up questions and issues to study, consider, and have more theologically robust dialogue with. Because societal change, technological advancements, they're part of the milieu of our culture today. So we're going to spend a few minutes considering what some of them are and where we go from here. But I want to be clear, this is really not a map. It's a starting point. It's a way to begin the conversation that we're going to have to navigate together as we're like, this is really crazy stuff. And it's going to feel crazy. And some of the stuff we're going to talk about is going to sound like it's not real. But it's a starting point for us to be wise, to be good stewards of the world that God has given us, and to be good stewards of the gospel message that He's entrusted us with. So first question, who are we? We are a diverse people. That is what we're finding in our cultural moment right now. From a positive perspective, that means ethnic diversity. When discussing cultural issues, one of the greatest changes we are seeing in the U.S. right now is this increase in ethnic diversity. Pew Research found that 48% of Gen Zers are considered racial or ethnic minority. Compare that to the same study for millennials that was done in 2002, only 39% of millennials were considered the same. Gen Z, and to break that down, Gen Z is those who were born somewhere around the early to mid 90s up to about 2010, is estimated to be the last generation in the US that is predominantly white. That means their norm is diversity. They are incredibly comfortable. They are more comfortable in diverse environments with leadership, representation, and engagement. A news report I saw just yesterday said that their Gen Zers are literally changing the way the workspace thinks and talks about diversity just because of how important that is to them. Within the next 10 years, the next generation, they already have a name, I don't know if you know this, they're Generation Alpha, and they will begin entering adulthood. Within 4 years, Generation Alpha will outnumber baby boomers, and many of them will live to see the 22nd century. Their standard is going to be one of ethnic diversity. And now, it's not going to happen everywhere at once, but interestingly, being in Texas, it actually is happening here faster than a lot of other places. The last U.S. Census report found that 95% of the growth in Texas from 2010 to 2020 was amongst Texans of color, with Hispanic Texans representing half of that growth. So for this upcoming generation, when we talk about the cultural engagement, this is a beautiful, important part of the identity and makeup of what it is. It's the embodiment of Revelation 7, where we look around and see people from all sorts of backgrounds in every tongue, tribe, and nation proclaiming one Lamb. Culturally, it also means as we're navigating some of these issues, we're going to see significantly more divergent and diverse perspectives on issues like family values, immigration, political activism, and how and when we utilize technology. So this ethnic diversity is going to come with some pretty interesting but beautiful challenges that I think the church really has the opportunity to lean into and celebrate as we look to the picture of Revelation and say, this is where we're all headed, and we welcome this, and we welcome the messy challenges that maybe that has sometimes, but it's a beautiful goal to go towards. So that ethnic diversity is the first way that we're diverse, but it's not the only way we're diverse. We're also seeing an increasing growth in what we're going to call sexual diversity. And Dr. McCoy kind of hit on that a little bit earlier, but we're going to pause here for a minute too, because it's a huge part of this upcoming generation that we're seeing. In 2002, Gallup found that 7.1% of U.S. adults identified as LGBTQ. That was double the number from when they first started measuring it just in 2012. And we know that the generational spread in these numbers tells us that that number is only going to increase in the coming years. So when we break that down by generations, only 2.6% of boomers self-identify as something other than heterosexual. For Gen X, that number goes up to 4.2. And for millennials, that number skyrockets again. 10.5% of millennials identify as LGBTQ. And then we expand that out again to Gen Z. That number is 20.8% of Gen Zers identify as LGBTQ. What that means is sexual diversity is no longer considered outlier. I remember as a child being told 2%. That was kind of the main thing that I would hear. That is not the case for our children growing up today. Last year, to give a very tangible example of how this might manifest and even find its way into our church in some ways, last year my then 10-year-old came up to me with a very honest, reasonable, and valid question. She wanted to know if Jesus was gender fluid. At 10 years old, in a Christian home, she was already familiar with this concept of gender fluidity, and she was trying to identify and innocently trying to make sense of what it means to be a triune God. She knew that God was neither male nor female, and she was trying to understand how the incarnation of Jesus Christ was him as a Jewish male. And that's where her mind went, because that's the world that she's growing up in. With 1 in 10 millennials and 1 in 5 Gen Z members identifying as LGBTQ, I'd also point out that with numbers like this, it means that when we talk about cultural engagement and connecting, it means reaching into our own families. It means connecting in our own pews. So we're going to have to take seriously the challenge of providing a biblical option between the prominent responses of condoning and condemning. The main way I explain this is kids don't want to be jerks. And society tells them that there's only two options here, that you're either going to be the hellfire and brimstone person that's going to be a jerk to you, or I'm going to be fully embracing and I'm just going to not, just fully accept everything you have to say. We've got to be able to navigate and find a middle path here to be able to lovingly share the truth of God's word in a way that society doesn't recognize exists yet. So who are we? We are increasingly diverse people, ethnically, sexually diverse. But there's another way identity continues to change. We are also becoming increasingly unknown. And this is one more identity marker we're going to look at before we move on. And this is idea of pseudonymity, the rise of pseudonymity. So in some ways, pseudonymity is not new to us, okay? We know the adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn because a man named Samuel Clemens wrote under the pen name Mark Twain. Benjamin Franklin took on the pen name Mrs. Silence Dogood after he was denied publication by the New England Current. And if you follow the future tech industry, one of the most famous pseudonyms in our technological age is the creator of Bitcoin, which is the first blockchain technology, Satoshi Nakamoto. To this day, their true identity remains unknown, despite them creating one of the greatest technological advancements of the 21st century. We don't know if it's a male, female, one person, many people. They just go by the name Satoshi Nakamoto, and we've never figured out who they are. One of the idiosyncrasies of this technologically connected world that we live in is this growth and this increase of what we're calling pseudonymous identity. So to be clear, pseudonymous is not the same as anonymous, and they're often conflated even in mainstream culture, but they're very different. One pseudonymous Twitter user explained it this way. She said that she saw that instead of identity being like a fixed thing, she says, no, identity is a prism, and I can rotate the prism, and depending on which way you're looking at it, that's the angle that you're going to see. So I have many layers or angles to my identity, and my pseudo-identity can be part of that. So a person has a name. So my name is Katie Fruge, and that name is tied to a real person in real life and in my online reputation as well. So like when you come at me on Twitter, when you come at me on Instagram or anything like that, you know the person behind the name that you're engaging with, and that's a fixed identity. An anonymous person is totally unknown. Those are the bots sometimes that you might hear Elon Musk complaining about sometimes. They're all over the place. They're irregular, and you never know who you're engaging with. It's a different person point every time. They're random. It's not persistent. They can be fluid and quickly shift and change. A pseudonymous name does not contain the identity markers of a real name. So I'm not going to go by Katie Fruge, but it is a more solid and consistent identity than some sporadic anonymous name. Another way you can kind of talk about this is a pseudonymous name has what we call metadata, like greater, bigger data attached to it. It's a consistent identity without any personal markers. And to a large degree, that's what our culture is drifting towards. One big supporter of pseudonymity is a guy named Balaji Srinivasan, and he says, Zoom is 2021, but by 2030, you may not use your real face, voice, language, or accent online. And there are videos that I'd be happy to share that you can share later about avatars that are becoming more and more humanoid to where you can't tell the difference between a digitally created avatar that looks like a human and the human you see when you're FaceTiming your family members. Interestingly, a pseudonym, it decouples ideas from people. It's like we're friends, but you don't really know me. So in a pseudonymous community, I'm free to connect, to communicate, engage with you, maybe even in a meaningful way. And the technology is increasingly advancing to a time where I could Zoom you or FaceTime you using my human avatar filter in real time so that while you think you're talking to a real human, you're actually talking to a carefully constructed avatar that reflects what I want you to see. In the pseudonymous community, this idea is increasingly attractive, and there's some arguments for it. And so we're going to go over the three main arguments that people have for it. The first thing that people see as an attractive element to this idea of a pseudonymous identity is that it protects against the social media mob and the tyranny of cancel culture, which is very commonplace in the marketplace of ideas. I think from the left to the right, we're getting kind of tired of cancel culture. We're finding that it just doesn't work. And so this pseudonymous identity is a way to work around that. If you don't actually know who Katie Fruge is, you can't cancel me. Okay? So it protects me from having that impact. Interesting, though, there's another way. It also helps protect not just freedom of speech, but freedom after speech. So I have 3 little girls, and I am always telling, especially my oldest, you can do what you want, but you can't control the consequences that happen after that, right? In a pseudonymous identity, I kind of do still have freedom. You can't cancel me anymore, so I have no consequences to my actions. So when I'm engaging in an online community, I have freedom not just to say what I want, but I have freedom after I say what I want. It allows me to have an identity that I am in complete control of. It decentralizes my identity away. Katie Fruge, that identity I have, it's a centralized identity. See, I'm connected to a social security number. I'm connected to a marriage certificate, a driver's license. There's all sorts of ways that anchor me to my community and where I'm at. And there's this increasing drive in the modern culture to go away from what they're calling the centralized system to a decentralized one. And the pandemic has really only aggravated what was already going in that direction. So we don't want to blame too much of the online things that are happening to the last 3 years. It aggravated, maybe accelerated it a little, but we were on this train track already. We were heading in that direction. So we now live, engage, and connect in new ways. And for many, the way that we're living, engaging, and connecting is a way that's disconnected fundamentally from our real lives. There's this growing appeal for pseudonymous identities to where my children are going to grow up in a world where they may have a pseudonymous name or even their favorite celebrities. They have no idea who they actually are. So you could be walking down the street and see somebody and have no idea who they are, and that might be your best friend online and have a genuinely true relationship with. So it's an interesting dynamic that we're seeing continue to evolve, but it does beg the question that if the future includes disconnection from our real lives, if there's this divide that's starting to occur, where are we connecting? And that's the second question we're going to pause on for tonight, is where are we? In 2021, y'all may remember, Facebook announced that it was changing its names to Meta Platforms, or Meta for short. This was a direct nod to this already not yet idea called the metaverse, okay? I know it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. I think they did that on purpose. I'm not sure. But the metaverse is the future of the digital world in some ways. It is a fully engaging location where we connect, meet people, can purchase items, make money, and literally do life together, all of it online. Research Pew describes the metaverse this way. It says, in today's terms, the metaverse is the realm of computer-generated network extended reality, or XR, an acronym that embraces all aspects of augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality. At some point in time, the metaverse is generally made up of somewhat immersive XR spaces in which interactions take place among humans and automated entities. Some are daily interactions with augmented reality apps that have more on their computers and phones. Some are interactions taking place in more immersive domains in gaming or fantasy worlds, and some occur in mirror worlds that duplicate real-life environments. That's a mouthful, I know, especially for 9-something at night on a Friday night. But we're trying to wrap our mind around what we're talking about when we say metaverse, because right now it's such a big idea. We don't really know what it looks like, and there's no www.metaverse.com that we can go to really understand and jump into the metaverse. So what are we talking about when we say metaverse? How are we connecting? What is this term? And especially as we talk about where's the future headed, This is where Gen Z and Gen Alpha will be. So it's important to kind of try to figure out how to navigate what they're looking at, what their world is. So I'm going to break it down real quick, some of the terms in here, just to kind of reiterate. So this ER is extended reality. Like this is the umbrella term, the grandfather term that covers everything. VR, this virtual reality. This is an idea of the person wearing the goggles doing like Beat Sabers. Have y'all ever seen that? My dad loves Beat Sabers and he's really good at it. But it's the person who's got those goggles on, the big bulky ones, and maybe you're touring, the Eiffel Tower or something like that. You're in a totally augmented virtual reality. AR is different than that, but it's still under the metaverse umbrella, okay? So AR is called augmented reality. Augmented reality is fascinating. I love to garden. I didn't know that about myself until about a year ago when I bought a home that desperately needed some garden stuff in there. So as I was trying to figure out how to garden or what to do, I found an app where I could scan my yard and augment plants and see what I liked on there. I was using augmented reality to see, would a rose bush look good there? Or do I need something bigger there? So it's got my actual world, but I'm augmenting onto it something that's not actually there. And an MR is this mirror world or mirrored reality. This is fascinating too. Imagine going into a blank warehouse and you put on some goggles or something like this, and it perfectly, what you're seeing on your screen perfectly mirrors what's happening in real life. And maybe your architect comes up with you, and in the mirrored world that mirrors perfectly something in the real world, you start seeing him build in that room. And you can see, oh, well, what if we put a wall here? What if we put a wall here and we can do this? I'm not a visual learner, and when I would watch those HGTV shows about, oh, let's just destroy a wall and I can visualize all these things, I'm like, how are they seeing this? Like, my brain does not do this. Mirrored world technology allows people like me who are challenged in that area to actually see what that looks like. It's taking a real space and actually changing it, altering it in a mirrored world. All of those are part of what we're talking about when we say metaverse. It's a big place with a lot of different points of connection that we can connect to. The metaverse is many, many things. For some people, it's a social place. One of the interesting parts to this idea of metaverse is that the metaverse is going to be a thoroughly immersive social experiment. Whether we're doing extended reality, virtual reality, mirrored reality, the metaverse by default is not a passive experience. I know a lot of us have some kind of like trigger PTSD from having to live stream church during the pandemic, right? Like it was awful. The metaverse is not that. By its very nature, it is supposed to be immersive. You're supposed to connect with people and be engaged in a meaningful way. So it's a very social place that people are going to want to connect. So it's real, but it's digital. It's also a place to make and purchase a lot of money. And we're talking real money, not like monopoly money. They're actually making money in the metaverse. So if you've heard of the term NFT, and show of hands, anybody heard of that term NFT? So yeah, some of y'all have. Non-fungible tokens are unique tokens that exist using this blockchain technology. It can't be duplicated. It's kind of like owning a digital Picasso or something like that. Like there's certain markers to this token that can't be duplicated anywhere else. Okay, imagine this. In April of last year, Nike launched 20,000 what they called crypto kicks. So you've got a virtual avatar somewhere in your metaverse world, and you bought a crypto kick, a Nike shoe that's an NFT. They sold those NFTs for between $7,500 and $9,000 each. And one of them by a Japanese artist sold for $135,000. Those are real money that people are buying for virtual NFT shoes. Within the metaverse alone, Nike is poised. The metaverse alone, we are not talking about gross sales, but Nike is poised to make $41 billion in the next 5 years. It's a lot of money. Or make it even closer to home. And this last December, President Trump kind of became famous. He put out 45,000 NFTs. Did you know within 12 hours he made $5 million? Today, the cheapest ones are selling at 6 times the initial amount they went out for when he released them in December. So there's a lot of money and interactions that are happening in these spaces we talk about. So it's not just some kind of online gaming thing where we just think kids are going and playing video games all day. There is real stuff happening here. This stuff is getting real, and it's going to get more real. Remember, we talked at the very beginning of the session about that human computer brain interface. They are actively working on technology right now to where one day there will be no discernible difference between what your eye can see and what is observed in a digital platform. Pixels so advanced that they perfectly replicate the human eye experience. You'll put it on or see it, and it will feel and look real. So, don't close your eyes because it's late at night, but imagine in 2040, you're going to put on your 3D Google glasses or whatever. You're going to go into a mirrored world of your local church, connecting and engaging with others via your avatar. You maybe sit down with them, engage with them within the metaverse. We're going to hear a sermon. It's going to be great. Talking in a small group maybe, having some prayers, staying after to attend a leadership meeting, and you didn't leave your house a single time. Some churches are actually creating kind of platforms like this now. And as we consider the future of online streaming and social networking with members, some are already beginning to consider the possibility of creating space and platform within the metaverse for this kind of thing. I know it sounds crazy, but for some, the metaverse really does seem like a future frontier. It provides a meeting place that has been previously out of reach for many, especially making connections and access available for the physically disabled and those who could not get out and venture out into the real world for various issues. Now that hits close to home for me because I have a 9-year-old who is physically disabled, and she's going to live with me the rest of her life. It's going to be very hard for her to get out and about, but girlfriend loves to hang out with people. Something like the metaverse could be a very useful tool for her to have meaningful relationships with people while physically getting out of the house may be difficult for her. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. According to Pew Research, we're pretty much split on thinking about the metaverse. For about 54% of experts say that the metaverse by 2040 will be a more refined, immersive, well-functioning aspect of daily life for 500 million people globally. That's 54%. 46% think that we're not going to be there yet. Regardless, though, to me it seems pretty clear this is the track we're on. This is where things are going to be heading. And I don't share things like this to freak people out or make them think that, the world's going to end or this is like some plot to a movie I've seen before. It's an exciting opportunity to say, let's get ahead of this. Let's think about this. Let's ask careful questions. It's unclear exactly what this will look like, but the data tells us that the metaverse is coming. To some extent, it's already kind of here. And with millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha being the most likely to utilize it, we need to think carefully as we engage the next generation with the gospel, especially considering the following. Gen Z and millennials are what we call technology fluent, okay? Millennials. So Katie had already alluded to it. Katie and I are both millennials. We're what they call digital pioneers. So that means I was not introduced into technology as a young child, but I was introduced to it at a fairly young age. And so I'm pretty competent in my technology use, okay? So my generation is the Facebook generation. I actually remember when Facebook, you had to have a .edu approved email address just to get an account, okay? That was the original. We're the generation of MySpace, Zanga, the Napster generation. We are totally comfortable engaging in the digital world, but we remember a time where we weren't so connected. Gen Z is the first generation, and they're calling them digital natives. That means that they grew up in an environment of technology. And just looking across the room tonight, if I asked the average boomer or Gen Xer in this room, the first time you remember communicating with someone on the internet. If you can remember that, it's probably going to be a memory of an email, maybe AOL, or some kind of a way to connect that you can vaguely recall, messaging someone in some kind of a platform. For Gen Z, that question doesn't make sense. It would be like saying, when was the first time you breathed air? Y'all laugh. My 3-year-old met several of her family members on FaceTime. That's the world that they're growing up in. For Gen Z, technology is so fully integrated into their lives that there is no memory of a first time. And in some capacity, especially when we think about how we're going to focus on millennials, Gen Z, and the next generation, this is going to feel like the next natural step for them. So as we think about how are we going to reach the lost culture, how are we going to engage in these meaningful ways like Dr. McCoy was talking about? How do we engage in prayer? Online, this metaverse, these opportunities for a big part of our community, this is going to feel like a natural place that they're going to feel bent to go towards. Right or wrong, that's where they're going to feel the pull. Some are going to see the metaverse as an on-ramp for meeting non-believers to engage and connect with the church. It's not the passive live stream. It is by its very nature engaging, active, and immersive. And we can actually already see some rudimentary examples of what the metaverse type of relationships could look like today, especially within the gaming community, believe it or not. There are real, genuine, and very deep relationships and connections that individuals are creating and cultivating within online spaces. It's fascinating. But I would also encourage us to think that the metaverse in some ways is going to force us to think very carefully about the ecclesiological purpose and function of the church. We need to question and answer, does embodied worship and gathering matter? Christians are a people for 2,000 years who have celebrated a physically risen Lord. So we have to ask, is the physical gathering of our collective a part of this worship process? Or is it the emotional, spiritual, relational connection of the believers that should be the priority? And I think it's kind of in some ways a bit of a both and. There is a place for utilizing the vernacular and the technology of the day. Remember, Paul became all things to all people so that he might win some. He met the Athenians at the Areopagus and he drew them into a relationship with Christ. I would also say it is the task of the church to be a sage voice of caution and consideration. It is our role to speak to the next generation and give them wisdom and truth. So hear me clearly. I do believe the metaverse has great potential, but it is also not without great concern as well. One thing I am frequently reminding, especially young students, is that the voices championing the loudest for the metaverse also stand to profit the most from its victory. We also need to talk about content consumption. Where are we getting this information? Where are we spending our time? Where are we being discipled? In 2021, YouTube announced that their users were consuming over 1 billion hours of content on their site. That was just in 1 year, 1 billion hours. That is the equivalent of 114,000 years of content consumption. That is a lot of discipleship that is happening. We are being discipled by algorithms that know us better than we know ourselves. Algorithms are the programs that put the things in front of you that you can consume. It's what keeps you online to get to that 114,000 years worth of content consumption. Technology, social media, this metaverse, they're going to be powerful tools. But believers, it is our job to also keep in mind the charge of Philippians 1, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. We already have tendencies towards fallenness, towards selfishness, towards indulgence, towards self-sorting, all the things that the metaverse kind of emboldens. So the question then goes, this is a human tendency already. We know it. It's just emboldened by this. So where do we go from here? How do we need to help the next generation hold on to their ancient faith in this digital age? Well, I have a few takeaways for that. I think that there's a few very tangible things that we can do to help this next generation. We want to be aware of the things that they're challenged with, but then also give them some direction here. Number one, we can begin with an understanding of the body and heaven that does not separate the body from the spiritual. So here's the deal. We kind of as Christians have a historically weak, what we call anthropology, like our understanding of ourselves and human nature. We kind of separate our bodies from our souls, from our mind, and we kind of splice it all up. We have got to get back to reminding our families and our children and our students to be human is to have a physical body, and that is a good thing. We have this often idea of painting a picture of heaven that maybe looks a little bit more like a metaverse, an ethereal place that's disconnected from our physical bodies. But Scripture, when we look at the teaching of heaven, it's real. Heaven is a real place, and He is a risen Lord, and He has scars, and He says, touch me, I'm real. We have to get back to this understanding that to be human is to have a body. We don't want to draw these separations. We need to have a scripturally sound approach that teaches that one of the fundamental components of being a human is to be embodied. We also need to be sure to affirm the connections that are made online, but then also provide some perspective. There genuinely are true relationships and connections that people are making in these metaverse-type spaces. I talked to a dad once after giving this presentation, and he told me his son is a bit of an introvert and just wants to spend hours after he gets done at work and just talks to his friends on Discord. But he told me, I feel like my son is more of his true self when he's on Discord than when he's in the real world. And that was a struggle for him. And we can work through that, and there's issues there, but what's important to note is that that son has meaningful, true relationships with that community. And we want to validate that and not just say that's not real. What we need to do is help him connect what's happening online back to his physical nature again. Interestingly, serotonin and dopamine, those are physical realities that impact our emotions and regulate mood. The things we do online have a direct impact to that. And did y'all know, for real, the reason Facebook created the like button is because they found that we got a rush of dopamine every time somebody liked our stuff. There are actual physical responses that we have to the things online. So we need to make sure that we don't get into this mindset of what happens in the metaverse, what happens on Facebook, what happens in social media stays in the metaverse. Because it doesn't. It's having an impact on us, and that's a good thing. Help draw it back to the fact that we have human bodies, and even the things online are impacting our bodies. And then also teach the goodness of God's creation. God created us with physical bodies, and that is good. He created it with different genders, and that's good. He created it with body type, sizes. And Christian theology celebrates this, and we need to be sure to pass this along as we're talking to the generations. We need to also be equally open about the potential and challenges of the digital age at appropriate times, but this is why we have to be so careful to be a step ahead. We're so often reactionary with some of these things, and then we find ourselves having to respond to something instead of saying, you need to be aware of this. The way I say it sometimes is, I would rather something be exposed to my daughter under my watch than at a friend's house at 11 o'clock at night, and they just try to figure it out by themselves. So it brings us to the final question. Why are we all here? Why talk about all of this in the beginning? So the answers to the previous questions tonight, who are we, where are we, they're going to fluctuate through times and circumstances. However, for us, for believers in Christ, and know and profess His death and resurrection, the why remains constant and never changing. Because the why of the church for 2,000 years has been and will always be the person and work of Jesus Christ. Why have a Waypoint conference? Why are we trying to navigate this? Fundamentally, we're here because God has called us to make disciples, and we want to be faithful to this task. We want to be efficient in this. And cultural issues and things like this help us understand the ethos of the moment, but the message, what we're actually communicating back to them, remains the same. We need to know the cultural understandings. We need to know where they're coming from, their thinking. We need to know what they're engaging with, what platforms are they on. But the message we're telling them is the same message. We're facing the same problems. They're just on new platforms. So the question, who are we? This idea of the spectrum of identity and self-understanding, it's really not new to the human condition. Think about Shakespeare and King Lear, maybe from your high school English class. King Lear cries out, "Who is it that can tell me who I am?" I am a huge Broadway fan, And my favorite song and one of my favorite plays in Les Miserables, Jean Valjean asks the universe, who am I? And even David in the Psalms reflects, what is man that you were mindful of him? We've always been trying to figure out who we are and who our identities are. We've been a self-sorting collective of different people for thousands of years. We're just gathering in new places and new communities and new technologies. So as we navigate the challenges of these old problems on new platforms, our why never changes. It's Christ, because for 2 millennia, he has helped a lost world find hope, strength, and identity and meaning. So with our eye to cultural issues, we need to be informed and engaged with our community, providing an anchor and a foundation in this culture of unknown, virtual reality, changing truth, shifting sands. I want to remember how often Christ is referred to as a foundational reality. Think about 1 Peter 2:6. He's a living stone, a cornerstone. Matthew 7, Christ's words are a solid foundation on which we build our lives. Go to the Old Testament, Psalm 18, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my God, in whom I shall take refuge, my shield, my horn of my salvation, my stronghold. Isaiah 26, trust in the Lord, for the Lord is an everlasting rock. Psalm 18, praise the Lord, praise be to my rock, exalted be God, my salvation. He's the firm foundation as we navigate this unknown, virtual, shifting sand, changing truth culture that we find ourselves in. So we're going to meet people in the Areopagus or the metaverse or wherever we're going to meet. And we're going to tell them about the Rock of Ages. So who are we? Where are we? And why are we here? In Christ we are known. In Christ we're grounded. And in Christ we find meaning, life, and purpose. So that is our call to continue the work that began on a cross in Jerusalem. We're going to meet in the marketplace of ideas and create space to engage and point them back to the timeless truths and launch them into the work of the kingdom of God. Thank you.